And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Thom Reed, fashion photographer and founder of Miami Models. His family is at the center of a historic UFO case, which was assigned a Vallee classification of CE4 with a case category of 3. The case is so noteworthy that the City of Roswell Research Library assisted the Massachusetts Historical Society and their lawyer to get Reed's incident formally inducted into the state record as historically true. And what's also amazing is it's the first UFO incident to be officially archived in the United Nations. Thom, it's my pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Jeff, thanks for having me, my friend. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. So you got a great audience, a great show, and I really appreciate the invite.
Well, thank you, and we are excited to have you, Thom. And if you don't mind, let's just start from the beginning and tell us about this incident that happened.
I'd like to start by saying that my mother had opened up a diner. We're from New York. My mother's from Hollis, Queens. My father's from Patchogue. And at the time, this is crazy. At the time, my mother went into the Berkshires to try to find this beautiful Norman Rockwell upbringing for her children. She found a diner for sale, and she decided to buy it. Well, I grew up basically in the 1960s diner, as well as a lot of other people that had moved into the area in the 60s to help beat Russia to space. The space race was very active in the area. You had millions of dollars going into NASA, which was in Boston, and that money was being filtered back into the Berkshire County. There was Sprague Electric, Command Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney. And oddly enough, because my mother's diner had a jukebox, a lot of the people working on those particular projects, whether it was capacitors or the medallion that was left on the moon by Sprague Electric, they would eat in her diner and became friends with my mother. And that ultimately became a big part of this. So with that said, during the time this was happening, there were multiple sightings. It wasn't just one and done. It wasn't 1969, which everyone talks about. I actually sent you an article from 1967, which involved our family. You probably saw that. And there was another incident in 1966. And there was one in the 70s. There were crop circles found in 94, in 2012, 2013. There's a lot of activity that still resonates, and people still talk about it. I have pictures of some really strange things happening. It's almost like a little skinwalker area. It's got this feel to it. It's more like a smaller skinwalker, if you will. And so with that, just before I forget, it was 152 miles from the Hudson River, which became important in the 80s for regarding the Hudson River Valley sightings. And it's 158 miles to the Bridgewater Triangle. So it sits basically right in the middle of the Bridgewater Triangle, the Berkshire's UFO, which is rebranded now by Unsolved Mysteries or Netflix, and then of course the Hudson River Valley. So we didn't really have an interest in the topic at all, but we were ultimately thrown into the mix in the 80s regarding a couple of other sightings and what people were reporting and what we saw. So anyway, in 1969, which is the case everybody's more familiar with, which has been on Ancient Aliens, Unsolved Mysteries, and so on and so forth, I was riding in a horse show. I used to ride horses, and it was really hot, and we left a little early because it was so hot, and it was a holiday, so there were a lot of people, having barbecues with others, and there were parades in town, and get-togethers, and a lot of people at the 4-H horse show where I was riding. Let's do this, and so we said, you know what, it's too hot. Yeah, Tom only got a green ribbon, whatever it was. They decided to leave early. And so we went to a spot called the Meadows Restaurant, which is still there to this day. And then we realized when we were there that there was really no traffic on the road. And my mom said, well, let's go to the diner because it was still open. She had a cook keeping it open. Let's just close it, and go home. And so we got to the diner. It was like nobody in there. And this was a holiday. You would have thought it would pack because we had the jukebox. There wasn't many places to listen to music. And that was usually the spot people hung out afterwards because they could drop a quarter, have a sandwich for practically nothing, and call it a day. And so we go in. It's empty. My mother relieves the cook, and we stayed there. She, got it ready for the following day, and it was getting kind of late now. Sun had gone down. She goes, well, let's get out of here. Let's go home. Locks up. We get in the car. It's a station wagon. My mother was driving, my grandmother was in the passenger seat. I was behind the driver, my brother was behind my grandmother, Marion, to the right of me. As we go through this bridge in Sheffield, the Sheffield covered bridge, um, it was really in rough shape back then. I had the big slats where I had big gaps between the floorboards or whatever, the planks. And when the car went over it, you could actually start to see light coming through the planks. Now, my grandmother commented that something about the headlights and where's all the light coming from because it was much more than it should have been. And as we came out the backside of this covered bridge, it dropped down and then it leveled off on a dirt road with potholes. So we were only going like 5 miles an hour. It wasn't like we were flying over this bridge. Probably like as fast as you could walk. And so I went to give my brother a fireball, those round candy cinnamon fireballs. And my grandmother had kind of turned around from the passenger seat and said to me, "You don't give him that; he could choke." I'll never forget that. It's like embedded in me. And as she was looking back at me, she saw what looked like a sphere, a round sphere, rising from the banks of the Housatonic River, and it rose up maybe two, maybe 3 stories. I was very small, so it looked huge to me. But as I go back, I realized it was probably like twice the size of a Beetle, a Volkswagen Beetle. It looked like a cue ball. It was sharp on the outside. It didn't bleed light. In the middle of it was like a 5-watt bulb, very crisp. So as it rose up, it fired these rods into the water. And Ancient Aliens, when they did their reenactment, they made it look like an ice cream cone. But in some respects, that's what it looked for. That's what they were asking me. What did it look like? How do we, describe this thing? And so it looked, like an ice cream cone. But so they came out the sides, it did not come out the bottom. So this thing's up about 3 stories, big rods of light shoot into the water, the Housatonic River. And then after about, I'm guessing maybe 4 or 5 seconds, they retracted and the sphere started going in the same direction as our car. We were on a dirt road. It had gone behind the trees, though, in the same direction we were going. My brother had looked off to the right and he saw what looked like an orange sphere, but this was much smaller and just above the water. So the orange sphere was probably at 5 o'clock, and the white sphere was probably, at 7. And it was moving more towards, 8 or 9 o'clock. When we went down the road to stop, because my mother, this was not the first time we saw something. There was a lot of activity in the area from 67 and 69. And then so my mother's like, "What is this?" And so there was a telephone pole where a lot of the utility trucks pull off to the side. We parked there. She looks off to the left. The windows were open. It was really hot. We didn't have air conditioning in the car, so the windows were open. We're looking out over the field, and all of a sudden you could see this, eh, disc-shaped objects, which looked like a turtle shell. It didn't look like some high-tech thing like you'd picture seeing, right? Or what you might see on the internet or something. It looked like a turtle shell. It had like uh, almost patterns into it. It's like if you took 2 turtle shells and put them together and you're looking at the bottom, it looks like, the top of a turtle shell. You look at the top, it looked the same. But what was interesting was that the center band that went around it made up the majority of it. It looked like a tire, like this big piece around the middle, and then these pieces that went on the top and bottom, which resembled the patterns and the density of a turtle shell in like a black and almost a silver and a tarnished look. It wasn't the same color. And then on the top side of it, is the direction that we were going. If we were to call that the front of the craft, the front of it had a glow to it, like an amber light. And that light carried through the majority of this disc, which was about the size of a football field. This was not a small thing. And so we're looking at this thing. You could see it not because it had lights, but because it was emitting its own light. And so I'm behind my mom, staring at this thing. My brother's looking at it, and we're like, "What's going on here?" And now we're realizing later on that we were in the middle of like a triangle. So this thing was at 11 o'clock. The sphere was still at around, 7 o'clock. And the other one was, at 4 o'clock. And then all of a sudden we started feeling this like a fog type of thing, like, what's going on here? I remember seeing the dashboard. I remember hearing this eruption of crickets and katydids, a flash in the car. And I remember for a moment or so I could see the dashboard, my grandmother, and bright. It was not like the dome light was on. I mean, this was just bright, and then bang, everything just changed. It was like we were deep underwater, and you felt that pressure, like if you jumped into a 10-foot swimming pool. And and there was a tapping sound, like underneath the fender wall, like stones, like tap 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 tap. But we were already stopped. The car was running. The ignition was on. The headlights were on, and then bang, we weren't in the car anymore. And that's kind of the last thing I remember from being in the vehicle.
I want to backtrack just something real quick. And what I find fascinating is NASA's doing all this stuff there, and there's all this UFO sightings going on too. So there has to be some sort of connection, I would think.
Yeah, and so with that, and that's a good point. So a lot of the people in the area had seen government coming out of the woods. They had the radios. Some had the old Willys Jeeps. They would see on the dirt road on Boardman Street because it's a very rural area. You also had the Nike missile sites, Minuteman missile sites. This is very high altitude. I mean, Dalton is super high above, ground level or ocean, whatever you want, how you want to word it. But we were very high, high altitude. We were in the Berkshire Mountains, the Appalachian Trail. And so that's something that came into light. It was a topic of conversation by the Historical Society later on. Your point was, good point there. And so regarding what happened to us, we were like, I can't stress enough how we felt. So I remember like seeing everything in the car. But I also remember feeling like I was wrapped in saran wrap or something. Like I was like this. My mother referenced it in Unsolved Mysteries as being like tight, and that's exactly right. It was almost like we almost couldn't even breathe, but we could see, but really couldn't move. And while we're in this state, we're seeing things change. The lights go on, off in the car, and bang, we can see everything. Then there's eruption of crickets, and then no sound at all happening. But we really were almost frozen in place. And then there was a bang, and we were no longer in the car anymore. And I remember at that point, the next thing I remember was sitting on something and sliding off like like a big chair or something. I don't remember. I was so young, but I remember landing on my feet and then looking around and seeing like a big open hangar, which reminded me later on as an airplane hangar. My mother, by the way, was a pilot later on in life, and that's where we got the reference to the airplane hangar. And if when I looked forward, wherever that was, I remember seeing where the ceiling met the wall, there was like a single tube of light, a space, a tube of light, space, light, space, light, space. And that gave out enough light in there that I could see in this open area that there was nothing there. It reminded me of like an empty airplane hangar with fluorescent tube lighting. And in the area that I was in itself was bigger than the UFO. And so with that, I remember, man, getting grabbed in my arm so hard that I'll never forget that. It hurt. And then I was pushed forward to a doorway. I don't remember who was there, who was grabbing me, but the person that was had my arm was leading me from behind, not from the side. I don't ever remember seeing him. I went out this door and they took a right, and these walls were very tall. Again, I was a kid, but they were tall, like higher than the ceiling of a house, and they were narrow, and it was very lit up. And so I went out this hallway. I took a right. I went down this, long walkway, and then at the end it teed off, and I took a left and a right, and I went into this room that reminded me of like an MRI center, but the glass walls, almost like the brick glass. It was bowed in on an angle, and there was a door here on the right side, and there was just this empty area on the left, at least momentarily. And then I was to sit on what looked to me now as an autopsy table. And so the table itself, if I remember correctly, it's a long time ago, but had a like a pole in the bottom of it. And while it was on the table itself, this apparatus was blowing from the ceiling. And so whatever happened, in my head, I don't know if my neurons were being affected. I can't make sense of it because one moment I'm like relaxed. Okay, I'm chilled. And then the next minute I'm nervous. And I slipped off the thing and I ran out this door. And as I went out the door to the right, I remember running into this long, like it was three hallways, one in front of me, one to the right, and one to the left. I run out, I see these hallways, and I realize that I'm in this large area that looked round to me, almost like if you took like a, I don't know, let's say hypothetically a quarter, and then you put a Y over it. So you've got a hallway to my right, a hallway straight ahead, and then this big one to the left that was twice the size of those two. And there were these gray markings on the floor. And this area was as large as an empty Walmart. I mean, this was not a small area. And again, much bigger than the craft I saw. And I remember, boom, being grabbed and brought back into this room. I'm put back on this table. This apparatus is like coming over me. I'm seeing what looked like, yeah, ant figures, if you will. The heads look like a football, um, long neck, like, elephant type skin. Uh, very different than what anyone else has ever described. I had someone do a very good depiction of it. It's in the museum, and there were two of them, and they were staring at a wall. They were, as far as I'm concerned, they were like right in front of me on the left-hand corner of this room, staring at something in the wall. And then I remember him looking towards me. I remember this thing now coming over my body. I was in my underwear. I remember these holes aligning. So picture this. So I'm laying down, and this apparatus comes over me, and then these two pieces aligned with each other. There were holes in the side. As it went over my body, there were these packets which looked like big raisins that were now being affixed to my skin. I remember a bump to my head. And I remember, being back into this large area with the tubes. And then I remember being back in the car. I did remember hearing voices. I believe it was my mother, my brother. He had a club foot, so there was a lot of attention, he said, to his leg. My grandmother, I don't know if it was her I was hearing or my mother, but there was a lot of like yelling. And when I came to in the car, my grandmother was now in the driver's seat. She swears to this day that she had to start the car, that the ignition was off. So my grandmother and mother were now reversed. My brother's head was on my knee. My grandmother didn't really drive, right? She had a driver's license, but back in the day, my grandmother didn't drive a car. So she had to go down the road, turn around and go back for help because we were still miles away from our house, but we were only about not even a mile to the local, where our diner was. And so she went back to Silk store to ask for help. That was the convenience store next to our diner. And they were staying open. It was like the only store in the area. And so she went back there for help. And then when we got there, she parks the car out front. I remember seeing her walk over the steering wheel. So I'm sitting in the back of the car and I remember her walking towards the entrance. And so I'm thinking, Mom, she's not answering me. My brother's unconscious. I'm the second one to come to, I guess. And the only person awake is my grandmother. So I grab the door and I'm walking out, like Nana, Nana, you know, uh, and she just walked in like I didn't exist. And then she goes inside, walks right by the clerk who was at the register, continues to walk back to the back of the store. And then she grabs like the handle of this baby carriage or a stroller, whatever it was. She's rocking that. I'm trying to grab her, Nana, that kind of thing. And the the owner of Silks, I believe it was the owner, asked her, "Do you need help? What's going on?" So she never really told him what she needed help for. I guess it would have sounded crazy, but she wasn't thinking clearly. and they still remember it to this day. I mean, they still remember that moment. And so, if we had, or my grandmother had mentioned anything at that point, we would have already known that WSB's radio was an AM station, had been working with the police department to get other people to call into the station to let them know where this craft was or where this activity was. And she never said anything. And so we left. The next morning, she, opened up the diner, and bang, we turned on the AM station, and there was Tom J with all these people. Hey, last night we had a slew of calls from this, that, and the other, these people, so we had a lot of calls from everyone from Great Barrington to Sheffield to Monterey to New Marlboro. And sure enough, those people having breakfast in our diner with us, they're like, oh, that's so and so. I know her. I know him. And this was a really good turning point for us because we were talking about the 67 event a lot, which also made the newspapers. And we were getting chastised for it. My mother had a very tough time. So when this took place, it kind of helped in some respects because we were no longer those New Yorkers who moved into town that were talking about something that a lot of people didn't want to be on board with or felt was stupid or silly. And so once some members of their family or cousins or those they knew were also now, you know, validating all this, that changed a lot for us. It made life a lot easier for us.
You appear to feel like this warehouse was much bigger than the ship from what you
Oh
saw
yeah.
from the outside. But a significant number of experiencers will say that even though the UFO looks small from the outside, it looks a lot bigger when you're inside of it. Thinking about that, do you think you were inside that craft?
No, I don't, because what I had been witness to or experienced was very mundane, or the grabbing of the arm, which hurt, had a very militant feel to it. And being that there were so many manufacturing facilities working with the government to build beat Russia to space, I think it would be I don't know, just maybe ignorant on my part to not consider that part of it. Um, and again, the craft was about a good 100 yards. I mean, we go back and we still know where the front of it kind of was, and of course everything's much bigger now, but we still know where that waterway was. It was over water, by the way, um, not the river, but like a pond, connect, like overflow from the river, and so very marshy, and so we know where it was, and it was a good 100 yards in size. So my son also played football, so it was big. And so with that, where we were was big too, but it was still much bigger than what we saw. And so I've heard that too, that sometimes you're inside and it looks bigger than or smaller. There's who's to say what type of a reality we're actually living at the time or part of. But I do believe what happened was we were witness to something that, this wasn't the first time now either. That's why my mother actually stopped and wanted to see it, because this was now the third time we had seen something. And I think the general census is, and also with the historical society and the state itself, was that we were working on the space race. We were also witness to a lot of activity prior to 69. 69 made a lot of noise because it was a holiday and so many people saw this thing or witnessed to it at the same time while they're with other people that they never met before, and they were all telling the same story here, right? So that helped. Um, Also, there was a lot of kids with their families at the same time too. So there were, mom and dad and the children were watching this together with other kids they went to school with. There was no denying that something took place, but again, what was it? And I think again that were witness to an off-world incident. I think the three objects were communicating with each other. I think that affected our neurons. I think, but we were, being picking up something, or we were part of something maybe we weren't supposed to be. And I think military was also tracking this thing. They grabbed us, removed us, did something, or tested us, or whatever this was. They also put in my body, which resembled raisins. I think that was something that kind of put me out. I think my body was absorbing something. Was it also extracting something in return? I don't know. But that scene, it was adhered to my skin for a reason. And we all came out of this at different times. I was the second one to come out of it. My mother was the third person to come out of it. My younger brother, who was the smallest, I don't think he came out of it until we were halfway home. So we all came out of this thing within maybe a 5-minute period of each other. We didn't all come out of it at the same time.
Did you experience missing time? And if so, how much?
Okay, so we, as far as the question, were we missing time and how much time was that? When we left the diner, I had to go to bed by 9 o'clock. That was my bedtime. So we left the diner maybe 8:30, quarter of nine. And when my grandmother returned to Silk Store, which is where we had actually left, she had gotten cigarettes before, and it doesn't really matter. But when we got back to Silk Store, it was going on 11. So we left at about quarter of eight at the latest. And when we were back at Silk's, where my grandmother had gone in and grabbed that carriage and was pushing it, it was almost 11 o'clock. They were just closing. So it's, 3 hours, almost 3 hours. And but there's four of us, and I believe we were taken somewhere, which would have been a drive. There's also, like I said in many interviews, that there were Nike missile sites, Minuteman missile sites. There used to be a nuclear power plant not too far from Sheffield, and you had Sprague Electric, Command Aerospace, all these manufacturing facilities that were being funded heavily by the government. And so this also brings up something I don't think I want to not mention, is that a lot of those who were working on the space race that had these meetings after hours in a restaurant, or my mother would lock up and let them have use of the place, they were alluding to the fact, at least according to my mother, that the reason they made the goodwill message that was left on the moon, that Sprague Electric made by Buzz Aldrin, was left on the moon, those who made that, forged it, were eating at our diner. They knew my parents. And they alluded to the fact that they weren't making this medallion because they're hoping that there's extraterrestrial life that'll see it. They made it because of the activity in 66 and 67 that was witnessed in the area. So they thought this would be the ideal opportunity to leave a calling card. And then 6 weeks later was a September 1st incident that was witnessed by over 250 people from the area.
A couple of my guests have talked about that the original inhabitants of this planet were ant beings. And it's interesting that you encountered them.
Yes, and I believe I was underground as well. And I do believe they were ant beings. And I'll tell you why I think that. When my brother and I were in school, we were trying to figure out what it was we saw. And at the time, the gray alien thing wasn't even, really discussed. That really didn't become big until Striever came out with his book Communion. So when we were looking for, what was this thing, bugs, we saw a red fire ant's head, how it was translucent to a degree, reddish and translucent, like a gelatin. That's what the head looked like. So, of course, the depiction, which is in the Roswell Museum, is more of a solid type of, it resembles it, but the gelatin head is something that it isn't, it's not depicted well in that way, but it did look like the head of a red fire ant. And it had a long, like I said, a long, thin neck. They were both about, 4.5 feet. Here's something else. I remember them being bigger than me, and I was almost 10. But they had these bent legs. They had hands. They had hands. Not, I remember hands. And my brother and I remember really well. This is like our body remembers this. When I still see it, I mean, seriously, I don't know if you, it bothers me to this day, because in some ways I know how crazy it sounds, but then now, since the UAP hearings and my conversations and my lunches with Tim Burchett and everything, I've learned a lot. Like, this is not as crazy as I once thought it was. But it was tough for a long time to talk about it because we're very grounded people. My father was a mayor, he was an attorney, my mother had a career, I had a career. So back, 20 years ago, this was like, oh my God, seriously, Tom? But and my father actually had to move to Connecticut to run for office because we never would have gotten elected, in our own backyard. We were like, oh my God. Um, so it's nice that now we're getting somewhere. and there's shows like yours and people that are, backing, this topic up a little bit because it deserves that. And I, like I said, I hope that everything that I've said and why I stay in mainstream and why I'm pushing so hard to talk about the facts on this thing and not, you know, I'm jumped in with both feet, but at the same time, I have to be a little careful too, because this is backed now by state government. It's backed by, supported by Congress. I'm one of Tim's, I'm going to be involved in the UAP hearings one of these days. Who's also doesn't live far from me, and so I'm trying to remain very, uh, grounded and factual, so that not to tarnish anything or have me say something that might be misconstrued. But I will say this: I had an experience with extraterrestrials. I know I did. I've seen what I think were two spheres that were communicating with this larger craft. I could, almost hit it with a stone. I could now, not as a 10-year-old kid, but it was not far from me. And this craft that was just hovering like this weird turtle shell, just giving off this weird, like I've been in an MRI machine, and I remember that tapping I mentioned earlier. Ta, ta, ta. That's what it reminded me of. And so there are signs today. If I see something like, oh my God, that triggers something in me. And when I go back to the park and I look over to the area where I saw that sphere, that bothers me. But at the same time, I feel connected to the area, but then it still makes me uncomfortable, but I still need to go. It's really strange on how this affects me.
Well, have you ever had hypnotherapy to see if there's other things that you don't remember?
No, I'm very good friends with Yvonne Smith, and she's been to my house, along with Lori Wagner. And there was one time where they, had me lay on a sofa because I was trying to get more of a picture, a clearer picture of a moment that I remembered, which was this like uh, like a shower curtain, like a clear shower curtain to some degree, and then these shadows figures behind it. And then I remember like almost like electricity going through my arms and my back, almost like electricity. And it hurt. And I was trying to make sense of where that was. I was trying to, when did that happen? Because I remember the packets. I remember the piece coming over me. I remember seeing the what looked like ants. The, the closest thing that it resembled was an ant. I'm not saying it was an ant, but it was tall. It was on its back legs, and it looked like a friggin' ant to me. And I remember things like that, like the turtle shell. I remember the turtle shell because as a kid, it looked like a turtle shell. So I also remember seeing patterns that look like a star configuration. And I remember, seeing symbols. And one more thing, I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'm like in the moment, right? So at one point, I remember seeing on a screen what looked like, like what the park looks like now. I remember seeing like a waterway and these three UFOs over this waterway, and these willow trees and everything. And when you went back to the park, the waterway looks very similar, but there was no willow trees. And then this guy donated willow trees to my park. So now the drawing that I sketched as like a 10-year-old kid now looks like the park, you know? Um, and so when I go there, it triggers me again because it reminds me of what I remembered as a kid. I was so scared as a kid, right? I did this interview maybe 2015. And when the first time that I mentioned that willow tree and that waterway reminds me of being on the craft, because that's where I believe I was on a craft. That was 1967 when I remember that. And so my mother had never said that she was part of that. Yet she went out and planted a willow tree near the waterway, just like the park, on our own property at the farm. And since what happened with our family, she moved us closer to her room in the house so that she could keep a better eye on us. And we had, bunk beds. And when I would go to bed, in the summertime when it was still, not right dark at 9, I could look out the window and I'd see that willow tree, and I'd see the water, and it made me uncomfortable. So I used to keep a fork underneath my pillow. And one night my mother came in to give me a kiss goodnight because, you know, she wasn't married at the time, and so she'd check on us the second time, kind of thing. You okay? Good night. See you in the morning. And she startled me once, and wham! I caught my mother under the eye with a fork. That's how this was to me. And then we go to school. and people are like, picking on us, right, and making fun of us, and we're outsiders, and my mother, got me a bag, a big punching bag type thing. She made it herself with clothes in it, and I had to fight because I, punch that and learn to fight, if you will, because I was in a lot of fights in school, and I was always small, and of course my brother was younger than me, and it got to the point where people would come into my mother's restaurant, farmers, the prison tattoos, suspenders, and manure on their feet, and they would walk into the restaurant just to give my mom a hard time, and it would clear the place out, and they knew it would. And so my mom went out there with a broom, once, and get out of here. This had taken place, and again, we were the outsiders. We were, um, seemed to be the topic of discussion in town. Um, my mom's diner started to tank. We weren't doing so well, and in the meadows where we stopped earlier, I mentioned that was becoming a bigger restaurant. And the reason for it was that our restaurant wasn't far from the second largest racetrack to Saratoga. And so that also helped because if you wanted a decent meal, eat at our diner and go to the track, where the Meadows was even now closer to the track. So the Meadows started to, give us a little competition. And so a lot of locals thinking that we weren't meant to be there. We were New Yorkers. We weren't meant to be in Massachusetts, right? It was like um, and so again, the people coming in with the manure on their shoes and starting fights and arguing along with New Yorkers that were coming in to bet on a track, and these fights started breaking out, right? And so that's how my mom met my father. That's how she met him. He came in from Long Island. Some guy jumped up on a table and exposed himself to my mother with kids in there and said, "You want to see something out of this world or something like that, Nancy? I'll show you something." And Howard, who became my father, was like, he's a New Yorker, right? So he had a different approach. He's like, what the are you doing? Now you want to eat here, you're going to apologize to the lady, you're going to take it to go and get the hell out. And my mom's like, oh, my hero. And that's how they met. So, and so with that, my mom, taught him how to ride a horse and that kind of thing. And they ended up getting married. And then he became an attorney and he, worked with another attorney to get this mentioned at the United Nations.
Can you tell us how your sketches wound up in the Roswell Museum?
As far as what happened with my drawings, I used to draw all these things. So I would sit in a diner while they were cleaning, and I would had my pencils from school, and I would draw these things. And I had a lot all over the years. I had redrawn it, and I had sketched it and looked at it and compared it to the park now and that kind of thing. And so because it was so faded and everything, I turned it into a black and white. It was basically black and white anyway, but I reversed it and made the penciling white and the background black. And to this day, it's displayed in the Roswell Museum.
That's awesome. Now, at some point in your life, you had a polygraph test over this whole incident. Who administered that?
All right. So I was contacted by the Historical Society back in 2015. And that was basically because our case went to the United Nations, and it had a track record, and it had a paper trail, and there was a lot of important people involved in it. And it had that classification and everything. And so so with that, it was Tom. My name is Debbie Aberman. We would like to speak to you further about your incident. Could you send us the information you have so that we can, put this before a board and see if they'd be interested in maybe doing something with it? And she says, but, we'd really mean a lot to the board if you could take a polygraph test. And so being in Tennessee now, I had gone down to the police department, like, where do I get a polygraph test? And I spoke to retired detective Steve White. He was from Florida. He was a retired detective, but he lives here in Tennessee, and he was working on cold cases, more on that side of things. And he was also part of the STAR team. He worked with the STAR team, and which MUFON. And so he said, I think there's a center here in town. It's actually part of the Department of Defense Polygraph Institute, And when you go in, there's different polygraph examiners. And I was taken into Jim Morris's center. And my God, man, I had no idea. So I go in there and I'm strapped down and all these questions, like, basically general questions, specific questions. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way, you know, something, right? I have no idea what they're going to ask me. They had rehearsed anything with me. I was there for 3 hours. And I went to leave, and Detective Morris was like, yeah, you passed with a 99.1%, no deception indicated. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, um, if anything, I was nervous, right? I've never been through something like this before. My pulse, they used some of the same equipment that was used for the astronauts to monitor them when they were in space. I mean, this was a very high tech center, and I had to pay for it. I had to pay $800 to have it done, and I passed it, no problem.
Now, weren't you also examined by body language experts?
Yeah, so the body language experts. So here we go again. Um, the body language experts, the body language experts that are on YouTube. For them, I think it's Greg, Scott, and a few other Mark. Um, one of them lives in Nashville, which is not far from me, and so I get contacted by them as they do a lot of uh, they saw the episode on Unsolved Mysteries, and they work a lot with Netflix films to see if who's telling the truth and who's questionable. And they asked me, like, would you mind doing something for us? And so they didn't want to go over just the show from Unsolved or what have you, because that was so edited up. There's more to it. And so I agreed to do a full-blown hour-long interview with them. They could ask me anything they wanted. And matter of fact, my mother was behind, she was over here too. She was, sitting right behind me. Um, and she agreed to it as well. And then they also, reviewed or interviewed Jan Green, who was in the show, the one who had the long green, outfit on. And of course, the three of us passed, no problem. And I think that's the important thing, is like, even the witnesses that had been part of this, that had so many struggles. I mean, that's what the one thing I really wish didn't other people didn't have to experience, is what we experienced. The ridicule, because the off-world incident itself, yeah, it's trying and it's confusing. Your body reacts to it, and you don't know how to make sense of it because it's different. And then you go to tell someone, and you become like a victim to everything and anything, from your backpacks being stolen in school to fights in the lunchroom to your mother's crazy, and then you're like, you got to stick up for your family, and then you go home and you're beat up, and you go to the hospital, and the doctor's like, well, that's what happens when you talk about stuff like this. And you know nobody nobody cared, nobody. And in a lot of ways it divided our family too, because after, so like my brother became very religious. He believes that, yeah, he's got to find. He was much younger than me. It affected him differently, but he started going to church, and not making. He could make sense of what happened and why. Whereas I was older, and I used to be the altar boy. I used to carry the cross. And to me, I was like, this is nonsense. You know what I mean? What I saw explains a lot. And just look at that. We've had, what, 5 global extinctions? And now we have 9 million species thriving on this planet. And if it was by, y- you know, if it was just organic, um, you would have had to have like 6 of each species male around the same age as 6 species female. Otherwise, they would have inbred, and they would have died off anyway. And they would have had to been in an environment that was conducive to them surviving and being able to have offspring. And so they had to be, if it was a, hypothetically, if it was a, we've got, let me word it this way: we've got desert, we have rainforest, we've got all these different environments, we have brackish water, we have salt water, we have fresh water. So whatever would have helped that animal or species survive, it would have needed to be in that environment. That wasn't by chance. polar bears didn't originally start in Africa, right? They didn't move, to Siberia or whatever, right? Or Alaska. Um, they would have never made it, right? So it's like our planet was stocked. You have 5 global extinctions, 9 million species living here healthy. If they were inbred, they would have died off a long time ago. 9 million after 5 global extinctions. But our planet rotates on a very unique axis. So it can house millions of species simultaneously. So through my years of, the best way to describe what Earth is, it's our galaxy's arc. It's our galaxy's arc. These animals or species didn't just start. Like if it was just, the Adam and Eve thing, even humans would have been inbred and died. Adam and Eve can't have children and have them breed, they'd die. Like the pharaohs, we know that. So this had to be something at a much bigger level. I think we're all part of a bigger picture. Really, that's what it is. We're all part of a bigger picture. And Earth is our galaxy's arc. That's the way I see it. That's what I believe. That's what I sense. And that's why I think water played a big part, because once water goes, it gets toxic. Everything dies. Everything that's brought here to survive for whatever reason, whether it's DNA or what have you, dies. Everything dies.
It sounds like you're saying that we've started over 5 times. Everything's destroyed and started over. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think our planet was intentionally cleansed or wiped out, and that life from various planets decided to call Earth its home because there was a way to extend life. I don't think there's any intentions to destroy life. You know, um, Otherwise we would have been gone a long time ago. So as far as the human race goes, I think there's species within a species, just like there's species of dog. We are, uh, well, O negative, for instance. I'm O negative. 9 members of my family are RH negative. My body temperature runs at 97.1, right? And you've heard this, I'm sure, because you're well versed in this. So you know that O negative, men, women, doesn't matter, their body temperatures run almost 2 points below normal, right? Um, Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not. I am now.
Okay. Well, all right, we'll look into it. So, with that said, why would someone's blood type alter their entire body's temperature? It's just a blood type, unless there is a connection to maybe a hybrid human or something of that nature. So when people say to me, "Do you think aliens are running around, today?" Of course they are. But I also think that we are in some way alien, all of us are. So O negative blood, I think, is the original blood of man because it doesn't have any tie to the monkey, for, elementary way of putting it. And
Interesting.
so, yeah. So once, if you're O negative and you have a relationship with a woman who is A positive, her body wants to abort that baby because your body picks up on the fact that it's an alien form. They use that word, alien form. So that person's body wants to abort its own child because it sees it as not being human.
Do you think it's possible you have an implant?
I've been asked it a lot. I've been checked with some equipment. I don't know how factual or how good it was, or to the degree of how good it was. But every time they go by my forehead, you would trip. Um, I do know that my son tested higher than coincidental chance at a research testing facility for ESP, which which is why he had the nickname Chance. I don't know where he gets it from. I mean, I feel like I went to college and a whole bit, but I'm no rock star when it comes to what have you, right? And if you knew his mother, well, she was, she was cute and everything, but she wasn't going to want to spelling bee. So why am I son has such a high IQ, which is like over. He could have joined Mensa, and he was able to test higher than coincidental chance. As a matter of fact, one of the tests he took, Travis Walton was with me. He was there. So they had my son in a different room at this testing facility in Knoxville, and they had Zeta cards and everything else, and it called him in a conference room, and none of us had any idea. I wasn't even in the same room, and when a test came out, yeah, he tested much higher than coincidental chance. And so again, like I had a call from him one night at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and he says, "Dad, you okay? You okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine," except it just woke me up, right? But he's like, "Check the house, something's wrong." And this was probably when he was about, I don't know, 21, 22 years old. He was at his girlfriend's house, and so I checked the house. I'm like, "Yeah, everything's good, buddy. I'll see you tomorrow. Whatever, stop by the house, whatever, whatever." And he's like, "No, no, no, you've got to double check." And he was so adamant that there was something wrong here that I did. At that point I grabbed the gun out of the nightstand. So here I am. I grabbed the gun out of the nightstand and I start walking around the house because when he says things like this, there's some truth to it. I know my son well. And even though I was tired and everything, I had to get up in the morning. I'm like, you know what? He's usually right. He's never really wrong. And so I again had assured him, I am fine. Just it's fine. I'll see you tomorrow. Anyway, he felt so so concerned about the situation here at the house that he got in his car and he drove here like 40 minutes to get here. But when he came around, there's a corner right where I'm pointing at I live on a corner. Came around as he was coming around the corner, he saw an SUV upside down on the backside of my property, and there was a person on the ground. And he got there just as the paramedics were arriving. So he felt it and saw it before it ever happened. And I never questioned him again after that. I'm like, okay.
Wow. Does he also have RHO negative?
Yeah, my son is actually AB negative
Hmm.
or A negative. Wait, he's A negative. His mother was AB negative. My father was O negative, my birth father, and my mother is A negative. And it's funny that we married. I married. My wife was A negative.
Now, what was your father's connection to the UN?
Okay, so here's something very interesting. If you were to just go on, hey Alexa, how far is the Hudson River Valley sightings from the UFO park? It's 152 miles. If you ask, hey Alexa, what's the distance between the UFO?
I don't have an answer for that.
There it is. Let me start again. So if you were to ask, how far is the UFO park from the Bridgewater Triangle? It's 158 miles. So the UFO park sits in the middle of the Hudson River Valley sightings and the Bridgewater Triangle. Interesting, right? So my father was approached by an attorney by the name of Bletchman, Robert Bletchman. He was at the time in 1992, he was the director of human resources for MUFON. And so he was also an attorney and knew my father, who was backed by Senator Christopher Dodd, his run for office, and Governor O'Neill and everything else. They were all Democrats and they all lived in New England and they were all in the same circles. And so Bletchman had said to my father, I got something big coming up and I would like your permission to mention the case involving your family, which had ties to the space race and so on and so forth, because I believe something could have carried over to the Hudson River Valley sightings. Is what you experienced and what took place in New England, does it carry over to the Hudson? And so my father was like, well, I still have aspirations, but, sure. And so to make it legal, I had a $500 check because attorney Bletchman lived in my town in Manchester, Connecticut at the time. I was the one who went over and gave Bletchman the $500 check just to make this legal so that it was on paper that, hey, they couldn't stray from what my father thought could, damage his run for office. If his candidate got wind of this, what could happen. This is a long time ago. And so with that, our case went in support of the Hudson River Valley sightings and Cash and Landerman at the UN. Stanton Friedman was there. Linda Morton Howe was there. And so with that, one of the key things were the environment, how we felt. And there was conversation about, Cash and Landerman, how the radiation, type of fields, in other words, it was about the, I'm screwing this up, but about the environment. It was about the fields. We had magnetic anomalies, what related to ours, and they had nuclear, or I should say, radiation readings with theirs. And of course, the way the environment was affected, the Cadians, the crickets, the frogs, and then of course, being so close to the Hudson and also being over the Housatonic River, they were both over a river. And what happened in New York was very similar in some of the testimony that of what happened with us. And so with that, he's like, I definitely want to do this. And so he mentions it. And then my father gets killed on the anniversary of our case going before the United Nations in support of the Hudson River Valley, Cash and Landerman, and its connection to the space race.
How did he die?
My father, matter of fact, here's his death certificate, and which both has the date October 2nd. At first, they said that my father died of sepsis, right? So he goes to work, he's feeling fine. The day before he passed, he's actually at a bar, an Irish pub, talking about the book that he's going to write about our case. And he was a politician, so it would have gotten some traction. The following day, he goes to work and he doesn't feel well, and his head hit the desk. And so they rushed him to Yale New Haven Hospital. And being that he was a political figure and a well-known attorney in the area, he had a temperature. So they took antibiotics and they were giving him heavy doses in the thighs of his legs. And boom, boom, Vicodin, whatever. And his temperature started to rise and rise and rise. And so they put him in bed and they put a tube down his throat because he was choking. And boom, he was gone. You know, and and so what happened was that he had a rare fungus in his blood, and so when they gave him the antibiotics, it killed the good bacteria that could help kill the fungus, and it sped up his demise. But he passed on the exact same day that our case went before the United Nations. And so for that, my brother and I are like, we got to see this thing through. We've got to do something with this. And that's why we did.
Now, there's a monument in the park about this, right?
Yeah. So what happened after his passing? And after getting the calls from the historical society, wanted to do something, and the fact that it has a paper trail, and my father, collected a lot of documents. Matter of fact, these were his documents from the UN. I don't really show these. That's Fletchman's letter. I mean, you've got one after another. I mean, I've got a lot of information here. And here's here's the symposium. And you can even see Stanton Friedman's name on it. Do you see that? And it talks about, did you see that?
Yes.
And it talks about, if I can find it in here, how how some pilots were unable to fire missiles upon, crafts. And so with that, here's even a handwritten letter. This is my dad's stuff. This came back from the UN. It's a handwritten letter from Fletchman. This is all going into my book, by the way. So anyway, with that, there was such a paper trail, went to the UN, 250 witnesses. Our diner was known to have altered the natural progression of the community because, like Billy the Kid altered the railroad. It divided the community. Some people believed it, some people didn't. There were fights. I mean, it was so out of control that the historical society is like, Tom, we want to do something with this because that doesn't happen, unless there's truth to it, unless it's profound. You don't find that amount of tension and despair. And like a lot of people were saying, why would you talk about the secret space program when we know it's a secret space program in your diner, when they're not supposed to talk about it, they could lose their jobs, or a mother could have lost their job, the father could have lost. We weren't the one encouraging it. We saw something and we turned the diner over to them to have private conversations. But because it got out, um, people were worried about losing their positions at Sprague or what have you. And so fights broke out. Then you had the locals with the manure on their shoes and all this kind of stuff. So it became like it was like 2 years of the UFC in our diner. I mean, it was really bad. And so the historical society's like, this is so profound. We want to do something with it. Whether it was a publicity thing to bring tourism, I don't know, because they still to this day don't all like it. Um, but so anyway, I got a call from the historical society, and they said, can you send me all your documents? I'm like, sure. So I sent them this along with a bunch of other stuff, and and then they contacted an attorney. Her name was Debbie Kessler, Attorney Kessler, and she went to the Roswell Research Library in Roswell and was researching, what they referred to as source documents. And then once they found what they felt was, some good material to speak with the board about to see if they could do something with this or get it, inducted. They were the ones who had to now take these documents, research the signatures, research the names, make sure that these copies that they had were in fact copies of originals. And then once they could verify that, then they had to sign off on these letters. It had to go through a court system. Then it had to be sealed by a circuit court judge, which was Kevin Titus. And then those documents were sent to the Historical Society. And then once they decided to move forward with it, then they didn't want to be standing out there by themselves. So they contacted the governor's office and say, listen, we'll do this, but we need it rubber stamped. We need your help on this. And so that's how they got the governor to seal off on it, because it was just too much. There's letters from the radio station. It went out on Channel 4 in New York. 200, like I said, 250 witnesses. We passed polygraph tests. We passed body language experts. All these other people that were part of it, who were part of the diner, people from the space race, they couldn't deny this was a true event. But no one could really decide, what was it you saw? What was it? They were still like, well, there's not many things that can hover 3 stories, for 15 or 20 minutes and not make a sound, and then two spheres moving intelligently. And so they worded it as an off-world incident. They never mentioned UFOs, but they mentioned off-world incident.
When are they going to get you into one of these congressional hearings?
I got a call from Tim Burchett. I have his personal cell phone number, so we talk. We meet for lunch now and then. And I'll tell you this. So after I passed the polygraph test, I got a call from Tim Burchett, and as I'm a constituent for him, and we were to meet for lunch. And one of the guys from the behavior panel, Scott, who lives, in not too far from me, maybe an hour and a half from me. So Scott from the behavior panel, Tim Burchett, and I all met at Lakeside Tavern, which is like a restaurant at a marina, and we talked about it. And so he actually went on camera and did an interview about having me speak at one of these UFO. Jesus Christ. He mentioned, Tim Burchett had mentioned that he'd like me to speak at one of these events, the UAP hearing. So I believe I'm going to. I believe that won't be too far in the future. I think that it's going to be, once they start bringing in personal witnesses, right? He really does like anybody with a military background right now. That seems to be the focus. And I think once they start going into a deeper dive, if you will, then they start bringing in personal witnesses. That's what I'll be speaking. So it does look like I will be, but maybe not for a year yet.
So, do you generally think that the ETs are benevolent?
Okay, do I think ETs are beloved? Well, I would say this. I would say that what we experienced um, with the off world was not as brutal as the on world that followed. I do remember being grabbed harshly on the on the on the left side of my arm, but I do not believe that that was extraterrestrial. I think that was government. So I would say that yes, I think we're in good hands. I think that this planet is to preserve life, not destroy it. Do I think there's this big message to, stop the nukes and all the things that so many people talk about? I don't know about that, but I think that if we were to come under attack, it would have been a long time ago. Not now that we've have all these nuclear weapons and a bunch of very trigger happy people. So I think it would be a mistake. Um, do I think that we will eventually branch out and go to another planet? Absolutely, we will. The sun's not going to, burn forever. Might be millions of years from now, but who knows? The point is that one day Earth will be extinct, and where will these 9 or 10 million species go that apparently have been brought here to preserve life? So, will we unify and work together? Will someone do something stupid and turn this into a bloody bloodbath? Uh, I don't know, but I really think that there are multiple of species. It's not just one other species out there. I do believe that they can bend time. I do think that that there's a way to, like Caroline Corey said, a tear in time and space, or what have you. And a lot of people say to me too, where do you think they are? Where do you think they're positioned? Do you think that they're always coming from another dimension? No, I don't. I think that just like Bass Aerospace is making space stations, I'm sure they have some too, and they're able to work from that. And at the same time, when you mentioned a chip earlier, do I have a chip? What if that chip is not so much to, if you believe in parallel universes and that kind of thing, or they are going back through a tear in time or space, right? Maybe that chip is to bring you back to your proper planet, right? Maybe that's meant for more than just to be tracked kind of locally. Maybe it's more important than that. Do I think that those with O negative blood are being tracked? Absolutely, because that's the universal donor. Just like in war, when we were born back in the 60s, anyone with O negative blood was tracked by the US government, because as you got older, you could give blood for those who were, in NOM. And so O negative blood is important. I think that the fact that we have so many species living here after, 5 global extinctions is really something to look at. And if you look at the areas where you have had UFO encounters, where they've touched down, where they've been on the ground, look at what happens to the corn. Look what happens to the ground. If you go to the UFO park where this craft was seen on the ground in '69, the corn grows is 12 to 17 feet high. There are areas where nothing grows at all. If you go to the Travis Walton location where I've been there with Ben Hansen and Daryl Sims and Travis, the growths, there's growth spurts, and just like the corn grows faster. There's also people have said when they go to the park to this day that there are luminescent types of things happening with their clothes, that they can see them glowing in the fields. They see their sneakers glowing, just like a black light. And so we've brought teams in to dig up the soil and see what's in the soil. And there's no, you know, luminescent type of uh, anything mixed in with the soil that should cause something like that. And yet, if you go, you'll see it sometimes yourself. The 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 spheres they're seeing in broad daylight that they're capturing in 2012 and 2013 right over the park. There's still spheres seen in broad daylight. Where's that come from? You'll see it from only when it's gone. It's about, maybe the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, or sometimes a little bit smaller, but they see them all the time. Why, the secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, why is that happening still to this day? There must be portals. There must be a way for these, beings, if you will, to enter this Earth or this planet of ours in different ways. I'm sure there's UFOs and alien underwater in the ocean, but I also think that there's a multitude coming from other galaxies, coming through this tear in time or space. So to answer your question, I think there's a multitude of species coming here for different reasons. Maybe some are mining interests. Maybe some is more interested, or their purpose to be here is because of the gene tampering. Maybe there's an interest in gene. We've got sharks that can smell blood from miles away. We've got dogs that can hear, something from a mile away. If we were to incorporate that DNA in with human DNA, think of what an intelligent species could really do with that technology. Like the ant that I saw with human hands. So that's what I think we're here for. I
You
think we're basically lab experiments, lab. I think we're lab experiments. Yeah.
do you think that we will ever be invited to join the galactic community anytime soon?
Anytime soon? I don't think so. Um, I think that we're going to make some great strides. I'd like to know, you've got Trump in office now, who's big on the Space Force. And then you've got Elon Musk, who practically owns the space, you know, uh, arena right now, certainly over NASA, because NASA's governed by, NASA can't say what they want because our government governs what they say. Where Elon doesn't care, he's got free reign. As Bigelow does too. So I think that we're going to, if anything's going to be disclosed, it's going to come from SpaceX or it's going to come from a Bigelow. It's going to come from a privately funded organization. I don't think NASA's ever going to be, come clean with anything. Just like I don't think a lot of the politicians are going to come clean with anything because they don't really. Trump maybe because Trump's a bit of a rebel, but when you think about it, there's a lot of the money to be made. There's a lot of interest and why and how and knowledge is money, right, and everyone knows that. And so NASA's not going to give up any secrets, not when they've got so much competition in their backyard now from these funded space projects and so on and so forth.
Whenever you hang out with other experiencers like Travis Walton or anybody else, is there some way that you guys can sense that the other person is an experiencer as well, like some sort of sixth sense?
That's a good question. I say yes because I have heightened senses in a lot of ways. I don't know why. um, I can tell sometimes, how anybody, I think anybody can pretty much do this. When someone's walking and you go, huh, so you got a bad feeling about the person behind you, or, you just go into some room or you see someone, event of some kind, and you got to get a bad feeling, right? But the person hasn't done anything. Um, and then, I think that, maybe that we have more senses than we realize. Like, my head might say something, right? My heart says something else, but my gut never lies to me. And so maybe there is also something else that opens up. Like, for instance, let's say we use what, maybe 20% of our brain power. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think actually the current research has disputed that. If they look at your brain, actually we use all of it, but I don't know if we use it all,
Okay.
100% of the time. But that old saying has been debunked lately.
Well, okay. So let's even use that. So if we were to really crank it up and really, I think we still, okay, I think we still have governors in our heads, right? So to give you an example why, I had someone come over my house with what looked like an air hockey table, and they put a headset on my head and they cranked up my neurons, or whatever that with that energy that your head, your obviously that your brain puts out, and I was able to move a ping pong ball across this table, go through loops and everything else. Now, at first, I couldn't do it. This girl was over here. She was like 25 years old, and she was like, it was like, like a game to her. She was like whipping around. I'm like, how do you do that? I put it on my head. And this was with the people that had the testing um, from the testing center. So two people came over from a testing center to ask me to try this thing. And one of the girls was the daughter of the person from the testing center, but she had played with it before. So she had this thing going crazy all over the table through loops and everything else. And then they put it on me. And so my lawyer that was working with the Historical Society, that woman, Debbie Kessler, she also happened to be in the area and came by to see if I could do this. So she was here as well. And at first, I couldn't move the thing at all. I'm like thinking to myself, go, right? You know what I mean? Like willing it to go. Let's will it. And I couldn't move it at all. And then the girl said, just relax. Don't try to move it. Forget everything. Just go into like a Zen, right? Kick back and just don't even really, tell it to go, will it to go. Just kick back and picture it in your head going. Don't try to look at the ball and go. Just kind of almost close your eyes and just picture it. And it did it. And I was struggling a little bit to get through things and stuff, but I was able to get this ping pong ball to go along this board, which was like a mini air hockey table. Like I said, it was still about 4 feet, and get it to go around a corner and come back through a loop. I was able to do it. If I practiced with it, I could have done it really well. Now I heard that's actually a game by Hasbro or something. It's called The Force, and you can buy it on Amazon. And
Wow.
so what it does is it turns up your thought, turns up the energy. Basically, it's like putting an amplifier on your head. It's the same process that people can move robotic arms or uh, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's the same thing, but it just amps it up. And so where I'm going with this is that if we were using 100% of our brain power, which I don't know if we are, but if it's in discussion, it's in discussion, then, certainly with this thing, I would be on my head, those amplifiers, if you will. I would be able to know your credit card information, right? I would be able to know things about you. You wouldn't, there'd be no secrets anymore, would all be an open book. And so if alien life has higher IQs, then theoretically, the telepathic communication and the things that we're hearing and seeing, they would know everything about that individual. So think about that. So extraterrestrials know everything about each other, right? And we're not able to speak telepathically to each other, although I think in time we will, because of maybe like Neuralink, right? There's something that might speed that process up. And so before you know it, maybe we'll be. So maybe if our minds aren't strong enough to actually take uh, or increase a portion of our brain that might make that happen, with Neuralink, hypothetically, or something similar to that, we will be able to speak telepathically. We will know more about each other. We'll be able to read each other's minds. And that seems to be around the corner.
Imagine if your brain was already linked in with the internet. So you didn't have to even go to school anymore. You would just think of whatever you
Right.
wanted to learn and it was there.
So my point is, what do you think that if humans have the most advanced biological brain, that would be of interest of extraterrestrials as well, if we're healthy? I'm going to move on from that for a second. That's another thing. We are taking so many medications and so many pills, we could be screwing up our own existence, which may not be of interest to extraterrestrial life if they're here because we have the most advanced biological brain, that by incorporating something similar to a Neuralink into our brains is something, if we're O negative or whatever that interest is in our blood types, if that's even, a point to make, then we are in a way halfway there. We're almost becoming, similar to what extraterrestrials might be. If we have these 160 IQs, which would be of interest because if we aren't using all our brain power, then that can be cranked up. And, with some type of a chip, which I'm sure is much more advanced than what Elon Musk just came out with, think about the powers we would have. It's almost, and what would our world do with that amount of brain power? We wouldn't be nice to each other.
Right.
We can't stand each other now,
I
right?
was going to say maybe
Everybody's fighting.
we're a dangerous world, and then maybe that's
And what if we could tell what everyone else was thinking?
yeah.
What if I knew your credit card number? What kind of a world would it be? So are we treading on some, you know, uh, apocalyptic disaster if we were to be able to know so much about each other? My Lord.
Tom, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Yeah, I'm always open to that. As a matter of fact, if I may, just kind of plug my own podcast. I
Sure,
have
of
one too.
course. Mhm.
So I have a podcast with Rachel. She's terrific. And Mike Barr comes on our show as a part-time host now and then, along with Alana Tremblay, who was in the movie Gotti with John Travolta. Two movies with well, she was in a movie with Sylvester Stallone, and she was in a movie with Bruce Willis. Two movies with Bruce Willis. And so between those three, we have a pretty good list of speakers, and I should say that we have a pretty good list of guests. And so yeah, so our podcast is UFO Expo hyphen unrated TV, and with Rachel and Mike Barra and Alana Tremblay, and we it's pre-recorded, but we focus on musicians that might have had UFO encounters, and we focus on celebrities, and we're trying to do something a little bit different. And like I said, you're more than welcome if there's somebody else that we have on our show. If there's someone that you're of interest in, you're more than happy to send them your way too. But we are on Rumble. We're not on YouTube anymore. And so, like I said, it's UFO Expo hyphen unrated TV. And yeah, please tune in. We have a growing show. We just started it 3 months ago, and we're doing pretty well. My website, by the way, is ufopark.org or berkshiresufo.com. And yeah, welcome questions. Email me. You can email me through the site. And I don't mind talking to people about this because I think it's important. And after my near-death car wreck, I decided to refocus my energies, and this is what I'm working on. I think this is an important subject. My parents had a non-judgmental diner, and now I've got a non-judgmental park, which is for everybody else to go to. There's benches. It's sponsored by the Roswell UFO Museum, who played a part in our case getting inducted. Travis Walton has a bench there. Ben Hansen has a bench there. Mike Barr has a bench there. Ancient Aliens paid for the entrance sign through a donation. Unsolved Mysteries has a bench. Travel Channel. Matter of fact, I just heard from BB King's daughter, Rita King, and now she backs our park. So she has a bench there with the Tyrone Vaughn, who is the son of Jimmy Vaughn from the Fabulous Thunderbirds, who's the older brother of oh my God, when I don't have
Stevie Ray.
why did I have a brain fart? Yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so yes, so Tyrone Vaughn has a bench there, who's the son of Jimmy Vaughn and the older, or sorry, cousin or nephew to Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so the park is growing. I think our message is getting out there. I do stay in mainstream more than the community, if you will, only because I worry so much about the facts of our case getting lost. And just to make one final point, because I know you want to go, um, if you look at Unsolved Mysteries, they didn't do our show, or the show that they Unsolved Mysteries did not show our family's incident in the right light. They made it look like we were part of the Berkshire's UFO when there is no case called the Berkshire's UFO. That's the name of a TV show. It's actually the Reed family incident. And if you look at Ancient Aliens, when they shot and filmed at our park, they focused on the ball, the sphere. And then you look at other shows, they focus on the disc. So if you watch a lot of these documentaries about our family, you're like, I thought it was a sphere. I thought it was a disc. I thought it looked like an ice cream cone, right? Because they pick and choose certain parts of it. But if you want to look it up on Wiki, just type in September 1st, 1969 UFO incident, and there's the information that you need to find. It's right there.
Tom, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I would say that we need to realize that we're part of something extraordinary. We're all part of something extraordinary, whether we've had a firsthand experience or we know someone who has. But this community, and like your podcast, you don't have the amount of people listening to you because they're not aware of what's really happening, or that they've had an experience themselves. And so, like our case, I being the first case to be deemed, historically true, and with the state, I think opens up doors for so many other people that should be taken more seriously. And so with that is why I try to get back to everybody who reaches out to me, because I know, how painful it was for us not to have that avenue, have that, ability. And so with that, I think that we need to focus on unity and being nicer to each other, and being more sensitive. This affects people in a lot of different ways. Thank God I had my family to talk to, but I didn't have the town to talk to. And so with that, I feel for you. I understand, how tough it can be. And so with that, yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thom, thank you for your message. Thank you for being my guest. And we've got to get you back to talk about your NDE.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good night.
You too, buddy. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.